It's a real pleasure to be here in the beautiful city of Hamburg. In a way, I'd like to speak a little bit, maybe about our work, which is architecture, and what I see as the potential or the power of architecture. But maybe first, this is one of my favorite photos. You can say it's a photo of all of the richest people in Denmark and me. It's obviously the family that makes Lego, and we were asked by Lego to help them imagine the Lego museum, the home of the brick. So obviously the architectural model was made out of Lego, and the real building, we tried to sort of imagine an architecture that would be as inviting and as engaging and as inclusive as Lego is itself. So all of the roofscape is a series of interconnected playgrounds where you're invited to roam around without a ticket, enjoy the views of the city. The building is open in all corners, almost like a three-dimensional village of rooms where you can get inside. Daylight passes between the galleries. You can roam again without a ticket. And when you finally go into the galleries, it may be one of the few museums in the world where you are actually invited to touch all the artifacts. And I think that's the power of Lego, that Lego, it's not a toy, it's a tool that empowers the child to create his or her own world, and then to inhabit that world through play, and to invite her friends in joining her in co-creating and cohabiting that world. And that is exactly what architecture is all about. The Danish word for design is formgivning, like formgebung. And you can hear it basically means form giving. Because when you design something, you're giving form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, you're giving form to the future. And this can be very literal. Like in one project, we're working together with NASA and the American 3D printing company Icon to design the first permanent human presence on the moon. We're using moon dust and solar-powered lasers to sinter regolith or moon dust into a kind of obsidian, a glass like black rock. In Game of Thrones, they would call it dragon glass. And essentially, in 2026, we are sending the first laser printer to the moon to make a sidewalk tile 15 centimeters thick. And if it passes all the tests, then already in 2030, we'll be building the first permanent base where four astronauts can spend one month at a time on the south pole of the moon. So that's, of course, definitely feels like something in the future, but it's not a very distant future. Another way to give form to the future, our first project more than 2 decades ago was the Copenhagen harbor bath, where we sort of extended the life of the city into the water around it. We designed the harbor bath in Aarhus as well. And essentially on the opening of the harbor bath, when we saw the Copenhageners running from the city into the water, we realized that something special was happening, that a clean port is not only nice for the fish, it's also amazing for the citizens, that they don't have to to drive for hours to get to the beaches. They can actually jump in the port in the middle of the city. And we call this hedonistic sustainability. The idea that the sustainable city or the sustainable building not only is better for the environment, but it's also much more enjoyable for the people that live in it. And we've been pursuing this promise of hedonistic sustainability ever since. In 2019, we opened CopenHill. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's so clean that the steam coming out of the chimney is actually cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. As a result, we've been able to turn the facade into the tallest man-made climbing wall in the world. You can also ride an elevator inside and admire all the machinery that scrubs the CO2 and filters particles from the air. And it takes you to a man-made mountain meadow where you can hike and ski in the middle of the city. Denmark notoriously never wins any medals in the Winter Olympics. And we hope we may change this eventually now that the Copenhageners can actually practice at home. But you don't have to build an entire power plant or a mountain to make a statement. This is a one-room hotel on the Arctic Circle in Sweden, in Lapland. We surrounded the room with 300 birdhouses. So you get woken up in the morning to the singing of birds. You take a shower next to a squirrel. And you're essentially fully immersed into nature. You have nature all around you. You have nature beneath you. And you have nature above you. And this kind of very simple idea, you have an ADA accessible ramp that slopes from the hillside into the kind of sphere of birdhouses. And when we presented this idea to the world, when the hotel opened, the first month they got 1 billion impressions worldwide with essentially a 300,000 or 300,000 euro project. So you can actually condense a lot of meaning into very little building. Another example is like in Norway, we designed a museum in a sculpture park. And the museum is designed like a bridge that takes you from one side of the sculpture park over to the other. 2 galleries, a vertical gallery and a horizontal gallery that rotate when they're in the middle over the river. And it looks like this kind of complex sculptural form, but when you look closer, you can see it's actually made out of standardized extruded aluminum elements. On the inside, it's basically simple, like Norwegian timber 2x4s painted white. So in some way, you can say that we're creating something extraordinary out of something very ordinary. And even though you see curves and warped surfaces, every element is actually a completely standard piece of wood. And as a result, you can say the building is not only a museum, it's also a bridge, and it's also a sculpture in a sculpture park. In Prague, we are building the new Vltava Philharmonic, the National Symphony Hall of Czech Republic. And there it's located on a site where you have a highway and a train line. And we are using the different canopies of the Philharmonic to sort of connect down to the water. So all the way from the water's edge, all the way to the roof of the city, it becomes this sort of inviting, accessible element. So even if you don't know that symphony music is beautiful, you will actually feel invited, and you might end up just taking a walk and maybe one day go in and buy a ticket and listen to some of the concerts. So it's almost like a man-made extension of the urban landscape of Prague. In New York, I moved to Manhattan in 2010 because we were invited to design a building on the Hudson River. And we try to combine the kind of European courtyard, this idea that you have an oasis in the middle of a city, like a miniature central park, with the verticality and the views of the American skyscraper. So we call the building the court scraper, combining the best of both worlds. So you have this kind of oasis in the middle of the city, and you have a striking new silhouette on the waterfront of Manhattan. In Amsterdam, in the middle of the port, we designed a building called the Sluishuis, which is a city block that opens up to the water, so you can actually sail or swim into the courtyard. The courtyard really becomes an extension of the port itself. You also have terrace housing facing south, so you get sunlight into the marina, inviting people to go up from the neighborhood, and you actually have a promenade with views over the city, but it's also a solar farm, and there's a solar farm floating in the marina, helping power the building. So essentially, like this kind of mixture of utility and fun, functionality and enjoyment, sustainability and hedonism. And maybe lastly, our own office, we just finished the building. It's still under construction on this photo, or we just moved in. Essentially, we try to imagine a 7-story space where everybody, even though you have 7 different floors, everybody's like working as part of one team. Every floor is directly connected to the outside, and you can actually walk down the building from the roof park to the garden. And inside, you can always see all your colleagues on the levels above and the levels below. So this is basically what our office normally looks like. But like everybody else, in 2020, suddenly our workspace became Zoom. And except our model workshop, we found out that the machinery we used to make architectural models, like 3D printers and plexi sheets, could actually be used to making emergency medical equipment, like face shields and ventilator tubes. So over the first 6 weeks of the lockdown, we managed to manufacture 25,000 of these elements and donate them to the different healthcare providers around our offices. And it gave us this kind of insight that for some reason, among all the things we're doing or we know how to do in our company, suddenly we had the ability to address one of the most urgent issues on the planet at the time, which was access to rudimentary emergency equipment. So we thought, what other big problem might our skill set as architects and planners allow us to address? And we thought maybe we could think as big as possible, and thought, what if we could actually make a tangible, actionable plan for the entire planet? And you know, it was in the middle of the lockdown. A lot of our projects had been canceled, so we had a little bit of time available. So we started just looking at a number. 173,000 terawatt hours per year. That's the total energy consumption of all of humanity in 1 year. And if you look back the last 200 years, we've always been burning wood. And then we discovered coal, oil, and gas. And even today, renewables is a very small part at the top. But this kind of incredible increase in access to energy has also led to the greatest increase in quality of life. And if you measure it like life expectancy, you can see on all continents, completely at the same time, as soon as we get access to more energy, we start actually living better and longer. So the side effect, of course, as we all know, is that each year by now we emit 50 billion tons of CO2, and another one every year. And the CO2 gets caught in the outer atmosphere, and it sort of traps heat and increases and changes the climate. So the 4 main greenhouse gases are CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and F gases, and they come from a whole array of human activities. And to create sort of a simple framework, we divided the plan into 10 verticals, 5 that relate directly to climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, so that's transportation, energy, industry, food, and waste. And another 5 that are unrelated to climate change, but are essential if you want to create a sustainable human presence on Earth. So that's essentially biodiversity, health, pollution, habitation, and water. And in the interest of time, I'm only going to talk about a small part of the plan and only about greenhouse gases. But essentially, the question is also, what problem are we trying to solve? In 2020, we were 7.7 billion people. Today, we are 8. By 2050, we'll be 10. So it's a slightly bigger problem. And we should all have access to the same quality of life as, say, Denmark or Germany. So if we take Denmark, the problem is actually sort of almost twice as big. And how can we make this tangible or relatable? So we thought, what if we scale it down to the scale of one earthling? One of each of us. This is 100 earthlings. You can fit 1 million earthlings on a square kilometer. And if all of Earth would go to a giant Woodstock festival, you could actually fit them in 100 by 100 kilometers. But since we're trying to sustain humanity with the resources we have available, you can say, like, if you divide all of Earth into 10 billion equally sized areas, each of us would have 225 by 225 meters to sustain us. 2/3 would be water or oceans. 1/10 would be uninhabitable, like mountains and glaciers. And roughly 1 hectare would be habitable, and half would be nature, and the other half would be almost entirely agriculture with a little bit of city. And this is essentially where all our problems come from. So if we start looking at energy, 2/3 of our emissions come from energy, and we use energy to power our buildings, our transportation, and our industry. Using only existing technologies, we can electrify all of these industries as we stand. So instead of powering them with oil, coal, and gas, and this is how much each of us, this is our share in the sort of annual global consumption of oil, coal, and gas, like a ton of coal, 635 liters of oil. We can actually provide the same amount of energy with only this much wind power and solar. And if we want the same amount of energy as Denmark, a little bit more. And we need to store it with batteries and hydrogen. Hydrogen can essentially be used. You can make it through electrolysis by splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. And you can use it as green fuels. You can use it for fuel cells. You can make fertilizer. We already started converting our fleet of cars. We have 1 billion vehicles on Earth, and we're beginning to turn them electric. But if you want to power a Boeing 747 with car batteries, the battery pack would weigh 15,000 tons, making it very difficult to fly. So there's a whole sort of series of industries that are relying on other forms of renewable fuels. Then there's industry. A lot of the emissions from industry comes from energy, but some come from the chemical processes. So for instance, when you burn lime to create cement, you emit CO2 from the process. So as a thumb rule, every time you replace 1 ton of concrete or 1 ton of steel with 1 ton of timber, you lower the carbon footprint of the building with 2.2 tons. Then there's everything we throw out. Of course, we can recycle all the materials, but even the organic waste, we can gasify it, turn it into biomethane, essentially the same as natural gas, but turning our waste into a renewable resource. And then there's the biggest footprint, which is agriculture. Rice fields and cattle emit methane. When we burn our crop residue, we emit CO2 and nitrous oxide, and when we fertilize, we emit as nitrous oxide. And then every year, we expand our agricultural land with roughly 1 square meter per person, emitting CO2 from the roots, and also reducing the biosequestration and biodiversity. If you look at these fields, mostly corn and palm oil, this is how much agriculture is only made for burning, so you can make energy. We can produce the same amount of energy with much less solar. Then instead of burning our crop residue, we can turn it into biogas. And instead of leaving our land fallow every 4 years, when you have to rotate the crops, you can actually let the cattle graze, increasing the yield. And that leaves us to the cow or the elephant in the room. A cow and a calf needs 2 hectares of grassland, and they emit the equivalent of 108 tons of CO2 per year through their burps. To sequester that, you need 1 fully grown tree per ton of CO2 per year. And it just so happens that you can perfectly fit 108 trees on 2 hectares. And actually large herbivores, their natural habitat is silvopasture, the combination of forestry and animal husbandry. So by converting to silvopasture, you actually get happier cows, you sequester the CO2, and you increase biodiversity. If you look at cereal production over the last 50 years, you can see that the land use has remained stable, but the yields have more than doubled. So simply by converting to existing known technologies and well-proven methods like polyculture and silvopasture, we can actually take the necessary area to sustain one earthling sustainably from this and shrink it down to this. If we add the wind and the sun, and we actually combine energy production and agriculture, we can shrink the footprint even further. And if you compare it to the original footprint we had available, you can see this is the 225 by 225 meters. So we fit beautifully within the area we have available. This is how much it would take to sustain 5.5 million Danes, or 300 million Americans, or 10 billion earthlings. So you can say, like, the big questions we wanted to answer was, we often hear that we need more Earths if we're going to sustain 10 billion people with the quality of life of the West. We need 2, 3, 5 Earths. It's not really true. And also you often hear that we have to wait until new technologies are invented before it makes any sense to create the energy transition. And that's also not true. So it basically needs to happen at a lot of different scales. We need to sort of electrify our homes and our buildings so we can power them with renewables. We need to upgrade the building envelopes so we minimize heat loss or heat gain. We need to build with sustainable materials and harvest the available renewable energy depending on the climate. We need to design our buildings to move with electrical and personal mobility between the buildings. It's actually easy to make a city more walkable and bikeable by making it more green. We have to sort of harvest available renewable energy. We have to turn waste into a resource to power our industry and our transportation. We need to convert to best practice agriculture, so we free up nature to make our cities more biodiverse, and so that the trees can sequester the carbon that we still emit. And essentially, at every scale, from the city to the region, to the country, to the planet, we need to go through these kind of relatively basic transitions. So you can say, like obviously, we just did this work, and it's a small part of a bigger project we've called Plan for Planet. Not because we have any authority over Earth, but because we wanted to answer some basic questions. And what we can see it has done is that it has given us an overview and a clear sight that we did not have before. So we started informing the projects we do to fit with the principles of the Plan for the Planet. So just a few examples. This is the most environmentally friendly factory in the world for Vestre, the Norwegian furniture company. It's made out of locally sourced timber. It's powered by local hydroelectricity and solar. We negotiated with the fire department that we didn't cut more than 5 meters of trees, so the fire truck can drive around the building. So the evergreen forest is actually providing sunshade for the workspace. And the factory workers have this kind of beautiful, almost like museum-grade factory because it's made out of massed timber. So the walls, the beams, the columns, everything is timber. So it's not an added finish. It's actually the bones of the building. On the roof, you have photovoltaics and turf. And we took the turf from the footprint and moved it up. So the amount of habitat is actually the same after the building was completed as before we built it. We're building the new airport of Zurich, which is going to be the largest timber building on Earth, entirely made from Swiss timber. All the timber comes from 1.5 hours away directly to the site, and it becomes this kind of cathedral. We call it like timber brutalism, because it's like a very kind of muscular, athletic structure, but entirely made out of wood. So when you get off the plane, in the future in Zurich, you can smell that you arrived in the Alps. The control tower stands in the main space and pulls the skylight up. And actually, every time an architect announces a building, you're very worried what nickname the building is going to get. And the first nickname was the coffee pot, which I think we can definitely live with. In Singapore, we designed Capita Spring, a high-rise where we pedestrianized a street and turned it into a promenade. We lifted up the building to free the ground, shaded from the sun and sheltered from the rain. And between the housing and the offices, there's a vertical park, almost like a spiral that connects the lower levels to the higher levels. On the roof, there's a roof farm where they grow all the produce for the restaurants. For the European Commission in Sevilla, in Spain, we designed the Joint Research Center for Sustainable Construction. It's a canopy of photovoltaic shades that shades a plaza, so it's naturally ventilated and cooled. And it also means that we can turn the facade of the building entirely transparent, so the citizens of Sevilla can see what the commissioners are doing inside the building. But it also produces twice as much power as the building consumes, making this building part of the local energy company. I had the privilege to speak at the Vatican last year about some of our work, and Ursula von der Leyen also went with a personal meeting with the Pope. And if you ever have to meet the Pope and you wonder what to give him, he already has a framed photo of our building. So you're going to have to think of something else. And I'm not a Catholic. But I have a feeling that if I was, this could be my ticket to go to heaven. Maybe in Vegas, we're designing the home for the Vegas A's, the baseball team. And it's designed so that facing the sun, east, south, and west, it's entirely enclosed. But as you move around towards the north, it actually opens up with clerestories and a giant window to let in all of that sort of cold air and all the cold daylight without the direct sun, also allowing the hotels to see the game as it's happening, but also allow the audience to see framed views of Hotel New York, and MGM right on the strip. So in some way, the architecture of the nested arches is designed to respond against the Nevada climate. And as a last building example, we designed the headquarters for Google in Mountain View. The beautiful landscape around it is not only a nice park to go for a walk, but it's actually a series of root zone gardens that filters all of the gray and black wastewater so that it goes clean into the bay. The entire facade is made of dragon scales, as we've called it. It's actually photovoltaic tiles made out of this textured glass that captures more light, but also looks more beautiful. So inside this kind of catenary grid shell structure, a catenary curve is the most effective way to make a long span using the minimum amount of steel. So the roof is very thin, letting in the perfect amount of daylight for this kind of marketplace of technology and creativity inside. And I think essentially all are examples of how our sustainable future might not only be better for the environment, could also be more fun to work in and more beautiful to live in. But of course, a lot of this came from this idea of a plan, a master plan. So I think maybe the most sort of holistic application of this idea so far started like a year ago when I met the king of Bhutan, the young gentleman on the right. He came to London for the coronation of King Charles, and then he stopped in Copenhagen to say hello, and I met him, and he said that he had been thinking about creating this city on the border of India as a special economic development zone, because Bhutan is an incredible country. It's one of the most sustainable countries in the world. It's one of the few carbon negative countries in the world. It sequesters twice as much carbon as it emits. but the young people are increasingly moving to Australia and Canada to find more economic activity and life. So he wanted to sort of create a city that could be attractive for the young generations, rooted in the values of Bhutan. So I traveled around Bhutan, and it is this incredible country, like 72% covered in forests, defined by these like mountains from 7.5 kilometers in the north to 100 meters in the south. Agriculture combined with like these kind of beautiful buildings. The history and the traditions are still very much alive, so much that this is a dzong that is like hundreds of years old, and this is one that is being built right now. So all of the crafts are still alive. Like they can still actually build these beautiful buildings that they did like hundreds of years ago. And then spirituality is everywhere. It's really the main country for Vajrayana Buddhism, a form of Buddhism unique to Bhutan and Tibet, but now obviously Tibet is part of China. And they've taken all of these Vajrayana Buddhist principles and used them to measure their success as a nation with a gross national happiness index, taking the principles of Buddhism into the 9 measures of national happiness: well-being, health, education, living, time use, nature, governance, culture, and community. And we thought, like, let's use those values as the principles and programs for this city. So you have essentially a mindfulness city that doesn't displace nature, but enhances it, that where agriculture is integrated in the fabric of the city and where the tradition is still alive, so old and new coexists. The site is traversed by 34 rivers, and it became clear to us that the nature that is already there had to be the organizing principle for the city. So you have the rivers that connect the Himalayas to India. We turn them into linear central parks. We add like more local creeks that are sort of gravity-assisted drainage, but create like little community parks. And then the neighborhoods become like terraces or rice fields cascading down the hillside. The city densifies towards the border to India. And you have like 3 urban corridors, one for like regional transportation connecting India with the rest of the cities in Bhutan, one for public transportation, and a local street. And each time these transportation corridors cross the river, we build a bridge that becomes part of the sort of social infrastructure for the city. So you see, even the airport itself is a bridge crossing over 2 rivers. You can see the different parts of the city cascading from the small scale in the hills down to the 6 stories urban scale of a typical city like Hamburg. We're also sort of imagining a tropical equivalent to the vernacular architecture from the mountains. So almost like taking the existing vernacular tradition of Bhutan and giving it a tropical face. And then together with the city, we're trying to design different typologies where you can use local craft and modern manufacturing to make this kind of modular, systematic architecture that can be economic, that can use the available resources of timber and bamboo to respond to modern needs, but in a way where the old and the new is going to look beautiful together. So a local street where you see old and new buildings. The pavement is permeable, so flood water goes directly into the ground. You have the edge of the river that becomes more like a local park. You can see a market like a bridge in the background. And as you go up, you have agriculture and living combined, and you can even go into the hills at the top where you have tranquility and spirituality sort of immersed in the beautiful surroundings. The airport is the first arrival made with locally sourced timber, using sort of traditional ingredients at a kind of modern scale. A Vajrayana Buddhist center that is a bridge that when you pass over, you can see like spiritual masters passing on their wisdom. A healthcare center that bridges between Western and Oriental medicine. A university, so you imagine a child going from one neighborhood across the river to go to school can see what the students are doing and start dreaming about what to become when he or she grows old. A piece of agriculture where you can see modern and traditional agriculture as you pass on your way to work. The market is also a bridge, a destination in the middle of the river. A kind of factory where traditional and modern manufacturing is combined and on display as you move across the river. And as the last sort of, maybe the landmark of the city, it's entirely powered with hydroelectricity. And the dam is 160 meters tall, and it has to slope. And we're proposing to build it with prefabricated colored elements, almost like a Bhutanese equivalent of an Indian stepwell. So you can imagine the entire face of the dam becomes accessible as a kind of pilgrimage that you can choose, millions of different journeys down to the temple and back up again. There's also a visitor center. And essentially turning engineering into an art form and turning the infrastructure into the kind of element of spirituality. So we imagine that the temple dam, almost like collecting all of the values of the mindfulness city, could be for Bhutan what the Eiffel Tower is for France. So maybe to end, we're now in the process of realizing the mindfulness city. Of course, if any of you have a company that's interested, you should reach out. They're still trying to create the rules and regulations to make the mindfulness city as attractive to international investors and companies as possible. But we've made a little film that in 2.5 minutes presents what I did in half an hour.
Bhutan is the Vajrayana Buddhist capital of the world, a special place where wisdom and compassion have forged a unique way of life. Fiercely proud of their traditions, Bhutanese have preserved their cultural values for centuries through a joint effort focused on sharing, teaching, and caring. Their communities thrive on collective well-being, growing a society that measures its nation's success on 9 indicators of happiness. A land of mountains, forests, and rivers, Bhutan is one of the world's last remaining biodiversity hotspots and its first carbon-negative country. After centuries of perfecting a life of harmony with others and nature, Bhutan is now ready to show the world how to create a sustainable human presence on Earth. Descending from the Himalayas to the tropical plains, an uninterrupted flow of water, plants, and animals shape the mindfulness city. Cascading terrace fields become lively neighborhoods nested along naturally connected ecologies. Inhabitable bridges span across biodiversity corridors, connecting communities both physically and spiritually with centers for innovation, education, and recreation. The city may lead you on a journey of discovery to connect with your body, mind, and soul. A home for meditation and a place for togetherness, where knowledge can be shared, taught, and practiced with the world's spiritual leaders. The mindfulness city will join traditional with new, finding a balance that is both respectful and creative. A constellation of public squares provides centers for cultural gatherings and festivities, while a network of social infrastructure supports the community's everyday needs. People of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds will share knowledge and ideas to grow future generations into the leaders of tomorrow. Bhutanese arts will be preserved and traditional craft will expand through handmade and advanced technology. To build a city where engineering is art and nature is power. The mindfulness city will become a gateway, a bridge between local and global, past and future, nature and humanity. It will be an invitation to the world to participate in the Bhutanese mindset, to learn, to teach, and to share its values towards growing a more sustainable future.
Very nice.
Model F.
Regie? Okay.
Good. Well, first of all, I'm breathless. Before we met and when we discussed his performance, I said I want to address 9 3/4 questions to you, Bjarke, and you agreed. But I think most of the questions are obsolete because you answered them already here. So I leave most of them out and start with the question that's coming from my young staff members. So how can you perform this? How can you design this in 24 hours each day? So are you sleeping, or are you dreaming while you sleep, or are you sketching while you dream? So how do you manage this?
I have a lot of colleagues, a lot of very creative, very smart colleagues. But I think maybe the way we work, and I think we've always worked, is this idea that first of all, understanding precedes action. So whenever we start any project, we're very curious about it, and we try to ask a lot of questions and acquire a lot of, to listen and to look and to learn about this subject, almost like trying to educate ourselves in the last case about Bhutan.
Yeah.
So go to Bhutan, ask a lot of questions about Bhutan, try to really wonder what is different about Bhutan, what is a great strength, what could be a weakness, and once you start establishing that, you slowly build a set of values. And once you have a set of values or a set of criteria, problems to solve, potentials to unleash, then we know what the project is about. You can say almost like the most important thing is to formulate the right question. And once you have the question, all you have to do is answer it. And then that means that everybody can suggest ideas, and then you can test those ideas against the criteria or the values that you created for the project. And if they answer well to those values, it's probably a good idea to pursue. So you can say in that sense, like, sometimes I come up with a brilliant idea, and I love it when that happens. It feels great. But it's not my job. My job is to make sure that whenever the great idea comes, that's the idea we pursue, no matter where it came from.
To promote it in a certain direction. Did you send a team to Bhutan?
First I went myself, and then a team went there and spent also 2 weeks. I went there for a week and with my family and just walked around with the king and the queen and some of his ministers and the people. And I've been there 3 times for 3 weeks over the last year, but my team has been there many times. So in that sense, we're developing this little love affair with Bhutan.
Next question was about the complexity of your projects. Because you have farming, you have the energy concept, you have the water concept, you have social concepts in terms of respecting the nature of living there in Bhutan. So I was in Myanmar and all around. I never went to Bhutan, and they have similar demandings in terms of keeping their culture and not being overwhelmed by some other structures coming from outside. So how do you organize all these engineering and these experts? Are they in the team from the early beginning on, or do you engage them later? This was a question also from staff members.
Yeah, so you can say maybe 5-10 years ago we went from big architecture to what we've now called big leap. So that's landscape architects, engineers, architects, product designers, and planners. So that means that we do have quite a lot of skills in-house, but still by far the biggest group of professionals are architects, building architects and landscape architects. So we always work specifically with other experts that are very good at what they do. Yeah. And I think you can almost say that an architect is in some way similar to a journalist in that we often or always work for people that do something else than we do. Because architects normally build for themselves, right? So we never work for other architects, but we work for people that have a different skill set than ours, and therefore we always try to, like this idea of extracting as much knowledge, and just like when a journalist is trying to make a story come alive, you try to approach the story from a lot of different angles, with a lot of different viewpoints, and when you look at a story from different angles, you see different things, and you might discover something that is fresh, that you don't normally say about, and that makes the story more relevant to the reader. You might even uncover problems or potentials or conflicts that you didn't know existed. And
one of your titles was To Be and Not to Be, from Kronberg, Maritime Museum. And I want to connect this to be and not to be to the main topics of this festival. This is artificial intelligence. So how much artificial intelligence have we seen in your designs today?
I mean, pretty much everything you see is human intelligence. I mean, we have started, and I think AI is clearly a fascinating, a very powerful tool. I think so far, it is still somehow it's giving you an aggregate of something that sort of in aggregate seems to be what everybody else is doing, and in other words, so it's like almost like artificial sort of impersonation, or. And I think one of the things in architecture and design and in any art form that I think the artwork is an expression of the intent or the intentionality of the artist. And I think the way I see it, what comes out of Midjourney or some of the other sort of architecture-related or image-related large language models is actually not having intent, or you can say it's really a tool, and you can see some people have become very good at prompting. So it's the intentionality of the prompter that uses the tool, just like the knife in itself doesn't really have any intentionality. It's the person cutting the wood with the knife that has intent and skill, and therefore can bring a piece of wood come to life as a sculpture.
Good. For last question, you once stated in 2009 in this fabulous book that I think not only inspired but influenced the entire generation of young designers and architects, and you called your philosophy pragmatic utopianism. So, what do you think is most relevant, demanding, and most urgent for us architects and designers to do? What are the next steps we have to intervene with our creativity to make this planet still livable?
Yeah, but I think I mean, there's many ways to answer that question, right? But I think one of the things that I've found, and this is maybe the more essential, also you can say the idea of both and, to be and not to be, the idea of hedonistic sustainability or pragmatic utopia, they are oxymorons. So they're concepts that unite seemingly contradictory elements into a unified new idea. And essentially you can say it's the opposite of polarization. And I think what the world really reads right now is an antidote to polarization. Somehow the mechanisms of social media and modern communication, the kind of echo chamber of the kind of the preferences of search engines that in a way divides us to think that we are all very opposite, and to also has created this idea of cancel culture, that you can no longer discuss with someone that you disagree with. And what's fun about a discussion with someone that you perfectly agree with? But that's all we have left, because if someone says something that you really disagree with, instead of triggering curiosity and wanting to interrogate those differences, we stop all communication. And I think in that sense, in almost all of our ideas, what we try to do is take things that seem to be mutually exclusive, a waste-to-energy power plant and a public park, or a museum and a bridge, or like all these elements where things that seem to be incompatible, and to show that they can actually perfectly coexist. I think that's a fundamental value. In that sense, I also believe that growth and sustainability are intrinsically connected. Another idea we've always had is the idea of economy. So that economy and ecology seems to be often juxtaposed in discussions or in public debates. But if you look at what the two words mean, they both come from oikos, the Greek word that means house.
Yeah.
Because economy is the management of the household, and ecology is the study of where we live. So they are intrinsically connected and two sides of the same coin. So I think what we as designers and form givers need is to maintain this mindset that what seems to be opposites might actually both contain the answer, and that by only sticking to one side and not actually, like maybe one last aspect, if you look at any population, the normal distribution would be a bell curve. And if you divide that population into two extremes, it looks like everybody's here or here, but in fact, everybody's in the middle. And I think in that sense, there is some fundamental change that an oxymoronic mindset might be the most powerful mindset to have as a designer.
Last question. If at all, if there's something you haven't done yet, what I doubt, what is left? Because I always wanted to do a museum of tolerance. I always wanted to create an exhibition where everybody is met on eye level. What is yours?
Actually, we did win a Museum of Tolerance in Albania in 2011, but then Edi Rama lost the elections as mayor, and the project died. We've never built anything in the beautiful city of Hamburg. I would love to do that.
Perfect marketing. Well, as I said, we could continue with the conversation the rest of the day and even for tomorrow, and I hope that we see us again and continue our conversation. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for this great performance.
Thank you.
Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you.